We're number one. We're number one. We're number one. See, I don't know if that's a good thing because Toronto, again, for I think the second time on UBS in the last few years, was ranked the most bubbliest city in the world in terms of the ability for it to crash. So I'm going to do a deep dive into this article because it's rampant everywhere in the news cycle on top of all the crazy thing that's happening in the real estate market right now. Now, if you're looking for some help to navigate this crazy real estate market, you could book a call with me using the link that's on the screen right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Simply click on the date and the time that works best for you. And then when you see the prompt, fill in your name, email, mobile phone number, and the question you have for me, and then we'll chat then. Good day, Toronto. Welcome to another episode of Prime Properties TV. My name is Zhen, and I own and operate a RE/MAX in the Greater Toronto area on top of making awesome real estate content just like this for you. And on this reaction video, everybody is talking about it. Toronto is number one on the real estate index bubble worldwide. And crazy, just crazy. So I'm going to break this all down and rather kind of go through the talking points in so many articles that are talking out there because they're just taking data and percentage and numbers right out of it. I'm going to give you some more context as to the entire report, which I have right here on the screen somewhere, right? So the first thing we're going to talk about is how, we're number one, but you got to ask yourself, is this a good thing? And we got to obviously no, because that puts us at risk. But if we look at kind of how they define a bubble, they're saying that which cannot be proved unless it bursts. So we're in the most highest percentile in terms of worst real estate market out there that's most likely to be in a bubble. But this is not the first time that Toronto has ranked this high. So my question, generally comes down to how on earth do they come to these index numbers? Same thing with when I talk about HPI. You need to know the methodology in which that these numbers are kind of created because the data that they get from is probably all over the place because they're using cities from all over the world, right? So if we look at the methodology and data that I remember here, look, I'm going to read the 5 ways they index the score, right? So you got your first one, which is price to income, right? And I've always said this is kind of ridiculous. And yes, I know a lot of people disagree with me with it, but it's not about what the price is and your income. It's about what your income is relative to the available credit, right? So I would rule that one number one. And I don't know how they weigh these, right? The second one is price to rent. So this is what they call the fundamental valuation. And I agree. And I said this, I think, a few weeks ago. Price to rent is super important because at some point, if you put a tenant in there, and my general rule is you want to be 3 times the rent that you're charging in terms of gross amount, whether it's annual or monthly, it's the same thing. You want that amount to be there so that there's buffer for that person to live. But in Toronto, if you're renting out a 1-bedroom for, say, call it $3,000 in downtown core right now, that means that person needs to make $9,000 and you're looking at $90,000 plus just to service that on a 1-bedroom. So at some point that doesn't make sense, right? So I agree on that one. The second one is change to mortgage and GDP ratio. So I'm not really sure what they mean by that, but if I had to make an assumption, they're probably talking about the amount of mortgage that a person carries based on the GDP output, right? So fine, that kind of makes sense to an extent. Then you got your construction to GDP, that also makes total sense. And then you got your relative price city to country indicator. And I have no idea what that means. I guess they're just comparing it, the city to the country, because some of these things that they took out, like Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, they're not really, country related kind of thing, right? So of the 5 things, I would say 2 are somewhat questionable, at least from my perspective. So let's go through the index. Toronto is number 1 at 2.24, just a smidgen behind Frankfurt. Now, here's kind of what I'm going to say about where they took this data from. When I scroll down here, right, they talk about this is residential price growth as of Q2 2022. So since Q2, I don't know what point you want to use. The average price at that point in GTA specifically, right, was about 1.2, 1.24, give or take, depending on which month you use. We're at 1.12 right now. So we're down more than 10% from that point. So I don't know if that changes the price to income ratio and then the price to rent ratio. I mean, that may drop us a bit. But obviously, I don't know the markets in Frankfurt or Zurich or Munich or Hong Kong to that extent. I know what's happening right now. But I do know there's been a global drive into real estate since the pandemic. But how much of a frothiness there's in those other cities, I don't know. So that's something else I would like to kind of point at. Now, the thing that I do want to draw attention to, because this is not the first time I'm looking at this, I've been doing this for like 5 years now. And I think I've done the UBS report that comes out every time in the fall around Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving, every single year. So I pulled out the stuff that I had before, and you can see Toronto's always ranked really high. And I'm not saying that, we've always ranked really high and we haven't really popped, but I'm just saying that, look, we are here. This is just a number. And if it dictates how you kind of navigate the real estate market, then so be it, right? But for this to say, drive the sentiment in a time where, the sentiments are really, really bad, I think it does add a little bit of effect to it. It's thinking that, everyone's going to now wait for that ability for Toronto to pop because we're so ranked so high. But at what time did we pop? Because look, over here in 2021, we were second, just behind Frankfurt. Seems to be the case. We keep checking back and forth. Then you got 2020, we were ranked third at 1.96. So in those 2 years, 2020 and 2021, these came out during the pandemic years, and that didn't really stop anybody from buying stuff, right? And I'm not making a case that this is a bad report. I'm just making a case on the flip side, saying that, look, if you bought a property in 2020, you're still probably really, really, really far ahead, despite the index bubble, right? Then you look at 2019, we were second, 1.86. Then you look at 2018, we were third, right? So we've always kind of been in top 30. I don't know if it's a good thing or not. And then you got 2017, we were first. So these are all kind of the numbers you see in the last 5 years. I think they did one more in 2016. That's when it first started, right? And you can say, are they still pricing Toronto way overpriced? Because this 2017 one came out after the foreign buyer tax, where prices in, the 905 region came down a ton. And I don't know if they're using the 905 region or just Toronto, right? So it's very hard to kind of like gauge how their metrics are used. But what I can say is this: if at any point you bought anything, say from 2017, 2020, even though we're in top 3, you've done technically still very well. I'm not saying that you need to go out there and buy something right now despite us being number one. I'm just saying you got to use your own evaluation of how you're assessing real estate and what your needs are, rather than just basing it on like other people's sentiment or even mine and kind of what I'm telling you, or just this UBS's index, because there's a lot more in the nuance of why you're navigating and transacting in the real estate market in Toronto than, just this article, because, we're number one and not in a good way. Now, if you found any of this content useful, be sure to help me spread the knowledge by smashing that like button and subscribing to the Prime Property channel, because every single week we put out awesome content like this to help you. And if you are looking for some help to navigate the real estate market, you can book a call with me using the link that's right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. So the other part I was going down here, they kind of talk about the regional notes, right? So I highlighted this in the report. So it says that real estate house levels in Vancouver and Toronto have more than tripled in the last 25 years, which is absolutely correct, which is absolutely wild, because basically it's doubling every 8.5 years or so, right? And they're saying that the urban housing shortage amid strong population growth and failing mortgage rates are typically seen as two main culprits of long-term property bonanza in both Canadian cities. Look, I agree with them. So we've had massive immigration in the last 7 years since the Liberals came into power, because, immigration is our superpower as Canadians. And then we've kept rates very low since the great financial crisis. So that adds to it. Now we still have even record population growth. And I've been on the record talking about this. This is a 5-10 year play, not immediately, but we're now faced up to, call it, relatively high interest rates relative to the pandemic, right? These rates are higher since like 2010, 2008, I think. And now we're having one of the abilities for Canadian markets to be propped up come down. So that's why we're seeing a slowdown, right? Now, the thing here is that you can see, I'm going to blow this up. You can see over here, based on their index, you can see we started getting there in 2010. And this is kind of what I was saying, when population started ramping up in 2015 because the Liberals let a lot of people in, and the rates were actually really low around here. So this is why things went up. And then the pandemic caused it even worse. So you can see that's kind of like the history of how we got here. Now, the other thing I kind of want to draw your attention to is how we compare to other global cities. And I talked about, I think, last time in last video. And you can see right down here, they're comparing what's the cost of buying a 650 square feet flat, apartment, condo, whatever you call it, right? In our cities versus the rest of the world, right? So you can see, despite us being in the number one, bubble index, Toronto and Vancouver are still really, really low on the price to income ratio right here. So that's why I'm somewhat questioning how they're coming to this number. But if you ask me, if I look at these cities, I'm like, cool, all of these cities are really expensive. But you know what I see? cool. These are all the cities that I really would want to go visit, have a drink, eat some of their food, and explore their culture because they all look like really fun cities that are on my to travel list. Is there a reason why? Yeah, because a lot of people want to go there, right? That's why things are expensive, and that's what's expensive to own there. And look, I'm not comparing Toronto to the rest of these cities. I'm just saying, like, when I look at it, like, we're not that bad relatively for being number one. And here's the other thing I was going to draw your attention to. So it says here, for home buyers, affordability also depends on mortgage rates and amortization obligations. And I've been saying this for a long time. That's why price to income doesn't matter. It's the availability of credit, right? And the rates. Then we look here, conversely, elevated purchase prices can be sustained with low interest rates and no requirements of full amortizations as seen in regions like Switzerland and Netherlands, which means that you can stretch your amortization for a very long time. I don't remember this is the exact same thing, but I remember seeing somewhere in Switzerland, you could amortize for 90 years. 90 years, right? We're at 30 tops, assuming you have 20% down, right? So there's a long way in terms of how this affordability bubble could be propped up, right? So you just got to make sure you understand what's going on and not just, again, just read the one dot and, one metric here. And then the last thing I'm going to draw attention to here is the price to rent. And I told you, price to rent is very, very important because the people who are not owning are going to have to rent because you need roof over the head, regardless of how financialized we make the real estate market. So when your rents become too expensive, it gets really, really bad. Kind of like how in New York, you kind of, as a grown adult, you have to get a roommate. So when you look at Toronto here, like we're decently high. We're not really that bad relative to the other cities, right? So as long as we stay in this range, having the number as number one, look, it's up to you whether you think it's really, really bad or not. But I know there's a lot of kind of people going out there saying, look, prices are coming down, this report's coming out, the world is falling. Look, I'm not saying it's a great time to buy in real estate right now. I'm just saying just do your own due diligence and understand what's going on. Because if you're that person who needs a home and roof over their head, should you buy? Depends on your circumstances. If you're an investor that has cash sitting around, should you stay defensive? Again, it just depends on what you're trying to do and what kind of deals you come across, right? Because if you find a good deal that you want to keep even in high interest rates and you kind of stress test it against like 8 or 9% interest rate and the numbers still work, it's a great deal, is it not? Right? So again, just have some critical thinking as to what's going on because this is not new to me. I've done this for many, many years now, and I see this all the time. People make a big deal out of it, and then it kind of just blows over. So, it is what it is. Anyways, hopefully this gives you an idea of what's going on and kind of my feedback on it. Like, as you can tell, I'm not really that, excited or, concerned about this because this happens almost all the time. It's very normal, kind of like the seasonal swings in real estate that I'm accustomed to seeing and been doing this for a very long time. Now, if you're looking for some help to navigate this crazy real estate market, you could book a call with me using the link that's on the screen right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Until next time, your move, your future. See ya. Now that you're done watching this one, how about this one? Oh, you know what? This one's good too. Ooh, this one's really good. You know what? Just watch them both.